Pastor Matt.
And I'm Mary Rose.
And welcome back to our podcast, Reading Through Scripture. We are into Exodus chapter 18 as someone comes to visit the Israelites.
Now Jethro, the priest of Midian, and the father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. One son was named Gershom, for Moses said, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. And the other was named Eleazar, for he said, My father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' sons and wife, came to him in the wilderness, where he was camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent word to him, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. So Moses went out to greet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way and how the Lord had saved them. Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians. He said, Praise be to the Lord, who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God.
So, one, I think we need to talk about a little bit, we've talked about this before, but that Jethro is a priest of Midian, and so what exactly does that mean? Because
he doesn't believe in God.
At least, he seems to confess him somewhere in the middle of this text, but he offers a sacrifice to God, and that doesn't appear to be rejected, and so that's a pretty uncomfortable moment if you are a Jew dealing with this text, thinking about the fact that you shall have no other gods. So does it mean he is a priest of Yahweh in Midian, or a priest of the gods of the Midianites? And the truth is, we don't have a clear answer. There are a lot of people who have tried to argue away and say they can know definitively. I think we just need to leave it as a bit of a mystery. And I think this section, along with the rest of chapter 18 that we'll read later, seems to kind of put Jethro in the same or a similar light of Melchizedek, the priest earlier in Genesis chapter 14 and 15.
What do you mean by that?
How?
Yeah, I don't understand the connection.
Well, so he was a priest that kind of comes out of nowhere that worships Yahweh, that is not of Abraham's line, obviously, and yet is kind of a Gentile, you might want to say. I don't know if that's the right word for Melchizedek, because before there's a people of God, but who praises Yahweh, who offers sacrifices after the defeat of an enemy. For Abraham, obviously with Melchizedek, and now Jethro coming after they've just defeated the Amalekites. And then it leads to worship of God. Seems to be the one leading the worship in both cases. So it might be that we're supposed to kind of have this connection. And after the battle where Melchizedek comes, there's a renewal of the covenant with Abraham. And we're not there yet, but right after this in chapter 19 of Exodus is a renewal of the covenant, or the establishing of the covenant at Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. They're the same mountain, different names for them. But this battle happens, a priest shows up, offers sacrifices, and then there's a renewal of the covenant.
So, aren't we supposed to read Melchizedek as like a type for Christ?
Yes. Hebrews makes that abundantly clear.
So are we supposed to do that with Jethro? Or is it just like a happenstance coincidence?
I'm not sure if either is exactly right.
Okay.
I think it's building... I mean, I wouldn't put Jethro in the same line as Melchizedek in terms of the priesthood, because the priesthood of of Melchizedek is what's important, that he has no beginning and end, he's without genealogy, and is not of the line of Aaron. That's the whole point that the writer of Hebrews makes about Melchizedek. So Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, which you could say that in the same thing with the priest, with Jethro's priesthood, that it's not of the line of Aaron.
Right.
It's something different that is offering a sacrifice. So I think in a sense it builds and adds on to the case for the significance of Melchizedek. And that when this new priesthood comes, something new is being established. So you have the covenant elaborated upon in Genesis 15 after Melchizedek comes. And here in Exodus, after this, the covenant is, I don't want to say elaborated upon, but made more clear, right? With the giving of the Ten Commandments, with God saying they're his chosen people, his royal priesthood, holy nation. So I think it kind of ties into that of something new being brought about, and obviously through the priesthood of Jesus, a new people of God that's more inclusive is brought about. In verse 2 to 4, we kind of have Zipporah and the kids returning, which I think we talked about this earlier, way back earlier when they were sent away, but this I think is the first time now we have the second child named. And so one kind of goes back to Moses' past, right? Gershom, which means or sounds like foreigner or sojourner, so who'd been sent out. And Eliezer, there's kind of the explanation, but the name itself just means my God is help, or my God helps. And so kind of what's come in the past and now how God is leading them. So they were exiled from the land, and God has come to be their deliverer, their helper, and it points forward to kind of where it's going from here.
I feel like those names point all the way forward too.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, couldn't we all make the confession I am a foreigner, in a land where I don't belong, and God is my help? For
sure. And I don't know. I don't think Peter has this in mind. Maybe he does. I can't speak for the Apostle Peter, shockingly. But he uses the language of that we're foreigners and exiles, sojourners. Now that's how we're called to see ourselves now, that this is not our permanent homeland, but rather the kingdom of God and the new creation. And that all comes about because Christ is the one who has come to be our deliverer and our helper. And as the name Jesus, we talked about last time, when we encountered Joshua for the first time, that Jesus is the Greek version of that name, which means Yahweh saves. Yahweh is my Savior. And so we kind of have it, pointing forward. And so the question is, we don't really have here that the kids were ever sent away. So where are they coming from? Where have they been? And I think it makes sense that if Moses was going to Pharaoh, who he know is seeing his life, and that they're going to lead in conflict. If I'm going into a place where I think my life is going to be laid on the line, if I have a choice, I'm not going to bring my wife and kids along. Otherwise, that gives an easy target for someone to try and get leverage over me, all those things. So I think Moses, probably knowing at least conflict was coming, even if he didn't understand the full nature of it yet, probably said, it might be wise for me to go and hang out there until this is resolved, or if I don't make it out, right? People have argued about it, but I think that's the reason is just he sent him away before all this stuff happens. And they're probably reunited now because it sounds like the word about what has happened in Egypt and the crossing of the Red Sea has begun to spread. So perhaps Jethro heard about something that happened, even if he didn't hear the full story yet, that leads him to come and seek out Moses. I think this is unique and interesting, that in verse 7 and 8, as they come and they meet, particularly Moses and Jethro, this is the second reunion with a family member out in the desert. Who else was Moses reunited with out in the desert?
Aaron?
It was Aaron. As Moses says, that when Moses is begging not to be the spokesperson, God says, your brother Aaron is coming out. And so that was back in chapter 4. The first reunion, so Moses and Aaron, they met after the Lord had met with Moses at Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai, because the words are interchangeable. And the second reunion now happens just before Moses and Israel encounter God at Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. So, and this is also now the first place where the nations, if you take Jethro to represent the nations, that they know Yahweh in a sense of putting faith in him. So by the end, Pharaoh knows that God is Lord, but he's certainly not saved, right? He's rejected. He understands that he's not in charge and he's been condemned. But here someone knows in the sense that God longs to be known as the one who is Savior, who is righteous. And so Jethro the Midianite is the first of the nations that come to see Yahweh in that sense. So then in verse 8 to 12, we kind of have this reason for why Jethro comes to the saving faith, which is, what is Moses doing?
Telling them everything that's been going on.
He's retelling the Exodus story, right? So this fulfills the words of Exodus 9:16 and 10:2, that this story would be told all over the world and to every generation. So this is to a preceding generation and to now an outsider. So obviously it's not to the whole world yet, but it is the beginning of the fulfillment of those promises. And I often think about this when we're talking about like sharing the gospel or the proclamation, and sometimes I think we get so caught up in trying to explain things, like what it means and how it works or whatever else, that we forget to just tell the story. Because what is Moses doing here? He's telling the story of what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about hearing news, maybe not as much today with like talk news, which is all analysis and all trying to interpret, but historically the news was a declaration about things that had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And what's another way to translate the word gospel?
Good news.
So part of what Moses is doing is what we're called to do, which is just sometimes just share the story and trust that God's going to work through that.
I was just thinking also about how it's a good reminder for us that, like, we don't create faith, because Moses did a lot of talking to Pharaoh and it didn't create faith in him. But he tells the story to Jethro and faith is there.
Yep.
So we can't control that part.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this in the podcast before, but when I think about preaching on a Sunday, if there's 100 people in the church, there's at least 102, if not 103 different sermons that are preached. The one that 100 people in the church pews hear, the one I think I'm preaching, the one I'm actually preaching, and the one that the Holy Spirit makes go out there. And we don't control that. As we talk about in the Lutheran Church, kind of the three functions of the law, right? The idea that it can curb behavior, that it shows us our sin, and that it can guide our actions. We can have intent when we're writing or speaking for how that's going to be conveyed, but we can't actually control how it's received. And that's so true with the way the words go out, the way the gospel goes out. We try to do it as best as we can, but we can't actually control how someone else receives our words. And that is really humbling, I think, too. And so then it leads to verse 12, where this is the first burnt offering and sacrifice put out in the wilderness. We haven't heard of any since they left. And so that's just interesting in and of itself. Like, where are they doing this? They haven't built an altar yet. An altar wasn't commanded. They haven't got the tabernacle yet.
But I mean, wouldn't that have been a part of their worship before? Like when they were saying, let us go out into the wilderness that we may worship. Like, offerings were a part of that.
Presumably, yeah. I mean, they said we don't know how much we're going to have to offer.
Right.
So,
I mean, why would we think they would have stopped doing offerings?
I mean, there isn't necessarily a reason, but you would think that would have been spoken of after the crossing of the Red Sea if they had done it immediately. Because usually, after God has done some sort of salvific event in Genesis, in particular, the patriarchs will erect an altar and give a sacrifice, or create a memorial, right? The stones or whatever. Truly the Lord was here and I did not know it, and it's not always a burnt offering, but they do something like that. We haven't really heard that.
Huh.
And so it's interesting that the first person to do it now is Jethro, the priest of Midian. Again, does that mean the priest of Yahweh from Midian or the priest of the Midianite gods? Mm-hmm. I don't know, but he's had faith and now is offering up a sacrifice to Yahweh. And then, and this is just a side note that I don't know what to do with, maybe the solution is that Jethro brought it. But it says, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Yours didn't include eat bread, but that's in the Hebrew.
What verse?
Verse 12. The end. Yours didn't include that they ate bread.
Mine said to eat a meal.
But it doesn't, bread is the actual word in Hebrew.
Oh.
And so it always strikes me when I read that they've been complaining about manna, they've had no bread, they don't have any of this. Where is this bread coming from? But maybe the solution is that Jethro brought it. I don't know. It's probably not that important or that significant.
Well, they were still getting the bread every morning at this point, right?
The manna.
Yeah. So couldn't they have come with that? And it would have been just what they need?
Perhaps. Maybe I don't think, I guess it is called the bread of heaven in a few places. But it's not, I'm trying to remember if in Exodus, if it's referred to with the word bread and not manna at all. That could mean what it's talking about here. I don't know.
Well, maybe it just included more than just bread. You know, like if the statement is like they broke bread with them.
Sure.
Like it could be more things than just the manna.
It could just be the implication of like they had a fellowship meal.
Yeah.
Which, again, does this point to something deeper? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, you can talk about communion and breaking bread, but I would be hesitant to make that move from here. I'm less hesitant to make that move when the elders go up and commune with God. That's a very different thing, but that's not here.
Yeah, but at the same time, we have a very, clear-cut confession of faith. And then immediately a sacrifice and a meal together. You can definitely, I think, have a case for pointing to the Lord's Supper.
And I think if we're making the Lutheran and, in a sense, the very Roman Catholic practice of, close or close communion, however you want to phrase it, where, it should only be for the people of the community. Mm-hmm. They don't do that prior to the confession of faith and saying, we believe the same thing, or have the same kind of confession happening here. So, there is that. But again, I think it foreshadows for sure the meal of Exodus 24, when the elders go up with Moses.
Spoiler alert.
This chapter is often thought about as kind of like a hinge chapter within Exodus, for some very good reasons. Whether or not that's entirely intentional, I don't know. The Holy Spirit could tell you, but I can't give you that with definitive proof. But this first half, 1 through 12 that we already read, looked back, right? Moses tells Jethro about what God has done. There's a reunification of Moses' family, is looking back to what's already happened. And this second half, from 13 to the end of the chapter, seems to all look forward towards the need for a legal system, for ways for Moses to disperse and disseminate some of the authority he has throughout the people, which fits with where the second half of Exodus goes, in the tabernacle and then into the law of God being given. So picking it up at verse 13, the next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses, his father-in-law, saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone, and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me and to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws." Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You will not be able to do it alone. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know how the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from among all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law, and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel, and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. So here we kind of have the wisdom of Jethro coming out, right? Earlier, Moses had helped in shearing Jethro's sheep in Exodus chapter 2, and now, in a sense, Jethro returns the favor by helping guide Moses in shepherding God's people, the sheep of God's people. And there's, I feel like, some pretty obvious wisdom here. Moses seems to start, and maybe this is just the problem with almost every leader. In the short term, it always seems easier and like less work to just do it yourself. It's always faster at the beginning to do it and not hand off authority. But it is always slower in the long run. More work because you don't have anyone to share the load with. So I think there is just this sense of, kind of hinted at already in the story with the defeat of the Amalekites. Because what was the problem there that Moses had?
He couldn't hold the rod up.
Yeah. So he had to ask Aaron and Hur to hold up his elbows, right? He couldn't keep the staff and the rod uplifted for the whole battle. And so you had some hints already in chapter 17 that Moses couldn't do it himself as the leader. He was going to need some other people to help him. And that's also not surprising because earlier Moses said, I can't do it on my own. God send somebody else, and God acquiesced in sending Aaron. And now, as Moses begins this transition from not just deliverer, but also now to leader and ruler, it's getting to a point where, man, it sounds like Moses is getting up first thing in the morning, and there are people just lining up all day to have their cases decided. And I think Jethro is right. Not only will Moses wear himself, but the patience of the people is going to wear out awfully quick if you do it that way, if you're standing all day to get a decision. And so you can't tell in English, but verse 21 has a really great kind of pun in the Hebrew, where Jethro essentially says, Moses, you're a visionary, so visualize up some helpers for yourself. Which is, it's great in the Hebrew. And that is followed by kind of a parallelism, where he says, we want men of substance, fearers of God, men of truth, haters of corruption. And so kind of this doubling up of the qualities and the qualifications you need, which makes sense. Why do you need that? Well, if they're deciding cases, as soon as you have somebody who takes a bribe, all justice is subverted. And so I think as we think a little bit about just, I don't always like to make the implications of, well, what does this mean for us, as opposed to just taking the story, but I think there is wisdom in this, and I talked a little bit about it already with the idea of needing to raise up leaders and why that's so hard, but I think this is a reminder to any lay people listening that, like, part of the role of leaders in the church and of God's people is to do the ministry together. Do you remember in Ephesians, why does God say that he gave the church shepherds and pastors and evangelists and prophets and teachers, and I can't remember what the fifth one is. It's the fivefold, but I can't remember what the last one is right now.
Shepherds, evangelists, prophets, teachers.
Prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, apostle. Apostle, sent one. But why
No, I don't know.
It was for the sake of building up the church and equipping the saints for the work of ministry. It's not to do the ministry. God gives those people to the church so that the church as a whole is equipped to do the work. And that's part of why...
Sorry, I didn't understand what you just said. It's not to do the ministry, but it is to do the ministry? I don't understand.
So it's not so that the leaders, can do all the ministry, but they're sent to equip the church for the work of ministry. So leaders aren't the ones who should do it all, while everyone else sits there.
Oh.
The leaders, the prophets, teachers, shepherds, evangelists, and apostles are given from Jesus to the church to equip the saints for the work of ministry, is how it puts it. And so we're called to equip and empower and be equipped and to do that work, to take that load off as we all do it together. That doesn't mean the pastors don't do those things or the leaders don't do those things, but they're not the only ones. We've talked about this in some other places before, but like the capacity of one person to reach or lead or care for others is inherently limited. So it's better if you're equipping way more. Otherwise, you're bottlenecked for how much actual ministry you can do. But if everyone is equipped to do it, then the capacity grows exponentially. And so we want to kind of do that as a church. We want to build up others to continue to do the work of ministry.
I like what Jethro says in verse 23. I don't know if you were there yet, but...
Go ahead.
He says, if you do this and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain. So, he's still saying, if this is what God wants.
Interesting. Mine says it slightly differently, but kind of similar. If you do this, God will direct you, and you will be able to endure.
That kind of gives it different meaning.
It does. I'd have to look back. I don't have a note on it to know which one is the closer Hebrew reading. The question, I guess, that is Jethro speaking authoritatively to Moses or giving him advice? But I think that this also, just shows that God is not opposed to organization and hierarchy, in a sense. As we talk about in the New Testament, God is not a God of disorder, but of order. And it's something that I've passed over a million times, but it strikes me occasionally when I think of things like this. When Jesus, I think it's in Mark's Gospel, when he's feeding the 5,000, and it says he directed them to sit down in groups of 50s. So, there's a definite structure and organizational aspect of those things that we shouldn't just be well, it's just going to happen. It's going to, God isn't opposed to having a wise plan. I think we also need to listen and hear. It kind of goes more in line with what yours said, right? What did yours say at the end of verse 23?
If you do this and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain.
So, seeing for how God commands you, how he directs it, that's the key for... It doesn't mean that whatever plan is going to succeed.
Right.
But,
I guess I was kind of reading it as if God is willing and the creek don't rise kind of thing. You know,
Well, I think is it Psalm 127? I might have that wrong. But where it says, unless the Lord builds the house, the laborers build in vain.
Sure.
And, that doesn't mean you shouldn't plan to build a house. But we also have to recognize if our plans aren't in line with God's, they're going to be thwarted, in a sense. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand here. And the other part of verse 23 that I was actually about to get to, but is the ending. It says, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. What does yours say?
We'll go home satisfied.
Okay, that's the more common translation. And I think that's making an interpretive decision on how to understand go to their place at peace and satisfied. Because the one could be referring to Canaan, their place, where they're headed. They could get there in a way that's at peace or in well-being, because the Hebrew is shalom. So, or it's not shalom. It's related to shalom. It's another variation of that word. So getting there in...
It's the satisfied part that's shalom, right? Because yours says peace.
Yeah. And so it could be, not that they'll, like, be content with the decision, but that they'll actually prosper and do well, be whole by following this direction, and end up in the place of rest and peace, which is what Canaan was supposed to be.
I don't understand why you're making the connection to Canaan yet. Like, I don't get that.
Because if it's go to their place, as opposed to, because the place, what is the reference of place? Is it going back to their tents or getting to the place where they're headed, to the promised land where God said he's going to deliver them?
Oh.
The reference is not clear. And so it could be that by following this, they will arrive in the promised land in peace.
So why is mine translated home? Like, what is the word? Because all you talked about was the word for satisfied.
It's place.
The word is place.
Yeah, it's not home.
Oh.
So they're making a decision. They'll return back to their home, their place, their tent. But it's back to their place in peace. And so the question is, what is the place? Well, it could be the tent. In a sense, if they get the decision and have judgment quicker, they'll be more satisfied. But also it could be that there would be less grumbling and they'll get back, which obviously isn't what happens.
In Hebrew, does place ever mean like their hierarchy, like socially? You know how we use it that way?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if I can think of a place, but my Hebrew is not great. Usually when I'm pulling up these Hebrew things, it's because I've looked up those specific Hebrew things and made some readings. I can't think of other... Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's another spot where it would say something along the lines of, like, know your place, right? Mm-hmm. I can't think of any.
Okay.
If it does, it would probably be in Proverbs where it uses that.
Sure.
Actually, I think I'd have to check if it's the same word, but I think it must, because Jesus essentially paraphrases Proverbs when it's at the table. Mm-hmm. If you take the higher seat or the higher... I don't know if it says higher seat or higher place. I'd have to look that up, but I don't know offhand. I did look it up, and in Proverbs 25, verse 6 and 7, the word of not taking the place of the great is the same word. It is mekom in Hebrew. That is used both here and in Proverbs 25. Was there a connection you were going to make if that was the case, or just wondering?
Well, I could garner meaning from it there if it's that they're going, like, they've essentially, like, approached the people who are overseers of them with their issues. And so, like, if he, like, kind of spreads out the power, everything is in its rightful, like, order in terms of, like, Moses isn't handling, like, disputes between, like, whose fish that was or what.
Sure.
They didn't have fish, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, like, the disputes are being handled in their proper place.
Yeah, okay.
Is what I was thinking. But
and I mean, if that would bring peace and they recognize the proper hierarchy, and as we'll see later in Exodus, it might actually only be in Numbers and not in Exodus, but the constant bickering over whether or not Moses ought to be in the place he's in at the head of the people. They don't have peace because they won't accept the proper hierarchy that God has established, which that led to a whole lot of other problems after the Bible times of trying to claim that this is the hierarchy God established of royalty and kings. So you should be guarded about that. Moses is literally commanded by God to be in this position. That's not necessarily the same with everyone else.
So when it says that he chose leaders, officials over the thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, are we supposed to interpret that as like a literal, like, hierarchy where there's, like, one person in charge of 1,000 and then he has 10 under him in charge of hundreds and 10 under them in charge of tens? Like, is that how we read that?
I think so. I think it's, like, kind of similar to, like, our court system would work today, right? You have, like, a municipal court, and then you take it to the state, and then you take it I don't know the actual order, but
Like
up to the Supreme Court.
And the...
Right.
Okay.
I think it would be kind of like that. So you have, well, someone can handle these small matters. If it's bigger than that,
Sure.
we'll go up here.
So, I mean, we talked about this a while ago, but I can't remember. But we think there was like over 1 million Israelites, right?
The typical number that is thrown out is about 2.5 million.
2.5 million.
That come out.
So, like, he would have needed like 2,500 leaders over thousands.
Yeah.
Like,
It's still a lot.
It's astounding how many people he recruited to take the place of what he was trying to do on his own.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, oh, I'm trying to do the work of 10 people. Like, he was trying to do the work of
And then those broken down even more.
10,000 people.
Right.
You know what I mean? By the time you break down all of those 2,500, like, that's crazy.
And I mean, we'll see later, it gets built up for how these cases are going to be handled. We'll get some of the law. But you realize, like, a lot of the law that gets handed down later is kind of how our courts function in a lot of ways. You take precedents of here's how this has been handled, or here's like generalities that you apply, right, to a particular case. And so as Moses kind of instructs these people and hands these laws from God down, they should be able to handle most of those. And we'll see, I don't think it's in Exodus, I think it's in Numbers, but the one of the case and points where it has to go back to Moses is one about Zelophehad's daughters, because he has no sons. And they're concerned at the end about, hey, we're dividing up the inheritance. We're not going to have anything. Our father died with no sons, not because he was one of these people, but for his own sins. And so they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? And then the other people are like, well, they can't just marry anyone and keep the land, because then the land will go out of our tribe. And so that's like a difficult case that is brought to Moses that sets precedence for everything else. And there's a few others where particular things happen, and they bring it to Moses, and Moses says, let me go and get direction from the Lord. So there's a few like that, but by and large, after this, Moses kind of gets the commands, directs the people, and as far as we know, isn't deciding cases individually anymore, aside from those few difficult ones. So it seems like a structure that works if people will abide by it. But again, we're not going to get to it in Exodus because it's in the other in the other books. But some of the leaders constantly grumble about Moses being the man in charge, the one having that authority, and the one hearing from God.
Okay, can you remind me? Melchizedek was a king, right?
He was, and priest.
King and priest. Okay. Well, I was kind of hoping you were going to say he was a prophet, because I was just thinking about how Jethro acts as a prophet here for Moses. A prophet in the sense of, like, saying what is.
Sure. Well, and so we hear in Hebrews that he's priest and king because they're making a particular point. But Melchizedek does function in a prophetic type role, because the prophet was one who would bless the people, as the priest would. But so, looking back at Genesis chapter 14, this is, I'll read the section starting at verse 18. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. So
giving a blessing is
the
job of a prophet as well.
Abraham is called a prophet, and God says, go and speak to Abraham when he's pretended Sarai is his wife or his sister twice, and God says, he's one of my prophets. Go and have him pray for you and bless you. And so that is a role that the prophets and priests both have in a function, but typically the priests don't make up their own blessings. They do the Aaronic blessing, and then they call for God's blessing upon the child.
So maybe a small connection to Melchizedek as well.
Yeah, another one that connects them. And, I mean, I hadn't thought about that until you had said it before, but that quote, well, what is it that Jethro recognizes? Well, he makes the recognition, the confession, essentially, of what Melchizedek says. That God is God Most High. It's the God of their ancestors, Moses' ancestors, Abraham, and that he's the one who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Or maybe not in your hand, but has delivered your enemies and brought you out.
Yeah.
So it's a similar connection in that vein, too.
Interesting.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for this week.